All right, we are live on YouTube. For those of you that are, I think we're running late. We just kind of changed the format over the last couple of weeks, so everybody has eaten and is full, and now they're going to stay in their seat the whole rest of the time. And if you see them walking down this hallway, that's the bathroom behind us, so you'll know what they're doing. But we're a little bit different setup than we were last week. That's okay. Got some tables moved around in different places, but we're here. Appreciate everybody being online with us if you're viewing there or being here in person with us. We are going to get through tonight as much as we can in the book of Ezra. And so Nehemiah. We finished Ezra. We're in Nehemiah. But Ezra is going to reappear in our story. And so if you have your handout, I wanted to go back over something for everybody in class. Last week we had this on a slide. I think it was too small to see, but this is Jerusalem and the gates that are described in the book of Nehemiah chapter 3, and you can see that. Of course, there's been a lot of destruction and reconstruction and rebuilding since the time of Nehemiah, and there are actually 8 gates there today, and so if you're interested in studying that more, you can go and do that research and talk about all the different gates, but you should have a copy of that handout, and it talks about them, those 10 gates and what they were and how significant they were. I watched a devotional today about the dung gate. I never thought you could make a devotional message about a dung gate, but they did. And so what did you get there? That's where they got rid of the refuse and the waste, and we need to get rid of the refuse and the waste in our lives. So, no, dung, D-U-N-G. There would have to be a big gate if it was a dumb gate. That's funny. All right, that's pretty good. All right, so let's look at Nehemiah chapter 5. Nehemiah chapter 5. I know a lot of you were talking about the fire outside. The Gilmer County Public Safety did release that that's a 7,500 acre controlled burn into Tennessee, but it moved through Fannin and Gilmer and Murray counties. I know when I went out to pick up our cheeseburgers earlier, there was literally ash falling on me, and I rode with the windows down, and there was ash coming in the car. And so for those folks that have asthma and breathing issues, I know there's lots of kids outside at ball practice. That had to be pretty rough. So hopefully that'll get sort of controlled. And listen, for those of you that are farmers and involved in agriculture, the control burns are certainly necessary for the long-term preservation of the land. But it's rough out there today. So hopefully all the folks with breathing problems are doing okay with that. Chapter 5. So we've moved on, and of course we talked about the different resistance that was being faced. But here in Nehemiah chapter 5, there's perhaps an even more frustrating thing to Nehemiah, and that is that people are being taken advantage of. People are being taken advantage of. It says, now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their fellow Jews. Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. Others were saying, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine. Still others were saying, we have had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards. Although we are of the same flesh and blood as our fellow Jews, and though our children are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. And of course, we're familiar with the ancient system that to pay off a debt, you had to go and basically sell yourself into slavery to pay off the debt. We're very familiar with that in the New Testament. Can you think about what New Testament story very famously portrays that? Matthew chapter 18, I think. Parable of the unmerciful servant, right? The having to sell yourself into slavery to pay off debt. And so that's very, very common thing. And they were saying, look, to to pay off our debts. We've had to sell off our sons and daughters into slavery. It says we're powerless and our fields and our vineyards belong to others. Nehemiah says, when I heard their outcry on these charges, I was very angry, pondered them in my mind, and accused the nobles and officials. I told them, you are charging your own people interest. They're being taken advantage of, the wealthy taking advantage of the poor. So I called together a large meeting to deal with them. Said, as far as possible, we have brought back our fellow Jews who were sold to the Gentiles. Now you're selling your own people only for them to be sold back to us. And they kept quiet because they could find nothing to say. And so they eventually, in verse 12, they say, we will give it back. We will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say. And so it's sort of funny. Nehemiah has been working so hard to rebuild the city. And once again, it's the people's hearts that have strayed. Can you imagine what this would be like, right? That people in the church taking advantage of other church members financially, and certainly nobody would sell anybody into slavery, but I think we can all agree that debt is a form of slavery, right? And so this is, an atrocious thing that's happening. And so in verse 12, they changed their minds, and he says, anybody that doesn't keep this promise will be punished. And the whole assembly in verse 13 said, amen, and praised the Lord. And the people did as they had promised. But in verse 14, something else significant happens. And this time it's on the political front. It said, moreover, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. Now let's refresh our memory. Who is King Artaxerxes? Okay, he's the king of Persia. And what was Nehemiah's relationship with him? He was the king's cupbearer, absolutely. And so he is the son of Xerxes, one of the great kings of Persia. And here he makes Nehemiah, his former cupbearer, the governor of the land of Judah. And so he was the governor for 12 years. He says, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allotted to the governor, right? This is a special privilege afforded to governors under this empire. Certainly there are still advantages to being in a political leadership position in our world today. What are some of those advantages you can think of? It's hard to think of any, right? How about somewhere to live? Anybody ever been down to Paces Ferry Road and seen the governor's mansion in Georgia? Pretty nice place, right? Here's a trivia question for you. We know where the president lives, right? 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in the White House. Anybody know where the vice president lives? All right. Y'all weren't paying attention in social studies class. The vice president lives in the Naval Observatory, which is a smaller home, but also a very nice place. And a lot of times, or sometimes they won't, especially, if they live in Washington, already have a place. But the vice president, one of the privileges is living in the Naval Observatory. What might be some other privileges of holding political office? How about those guys that are always walking around in black suits? Yeah, Secret Service protection, right? And we've had presidents in times past. I'm thinking about the Teddy Roosevelts of the world and the Andrew Jacksons of the world who probably didn't need protection. But, now it's a different world that we live in. And, we, I think, for the longest time thought that assassination attempts were a thing of the distant past until we saw one live and in living color this summer, right? So we know that these are still things that exist. I think I heard on the news the other day there was some ruckus outside the White House, so these are still things that are going on because of the rhetoric from all sorts of different political groups. But for Nehemiah here, one of the benefits of holding office is that they are allotted food and wine and things that were given to governors. He said, we didn't eat the food allotted to the governor, but the earlier governors, those preceding me, placed a heavy burden on the people and took 40 shekels of silver from them in addition to food and wine. Their assistants also lorded it over the people, but out of reverence for God, I didn't act like that. Instead, I devoted myself to the work on this wall. And he says, furthermore, verse 17, 150 Jews and officials ate at my table. Verse 18, each day, 1 ox, 6 choice sheep, and some poultry were prepared for me. And every 10 days, an abundant supply of wine of all kinds. And in spite of all this, I never demanded the food allotted to the governor because the demands were heavy on these people. And so I think it's interesting. Well, one of the things that we as churches in the New Testament focus so much on is benevolence. And that is a need that has always existed and always will exist. And so what does this tell you about Nehemiah and his character? Which of course we already know about his character, but yeah, he's a good man, a humble man, right? Yeah, he cared about the people, and they were doing all this work to rebuild the wall, and he made sure that he tried to take care of them as much as possible. I think one of the things that stand out to me so much about Ezra and Nehemiah, it is their reaction to wrongdoing. And I made a comment about this in our devotional a couple of weeks ago. And I don't know the best way to even word this. I think we've gotten lax in our response to wrong. And what I mean by that is that when we see wrong and we see sin, our reaction is just kind of, well, people are people, and, they're going to do what they want to do. And, we just have to kind of deal with it. And we even see it in church, and we say, oh, well, that's just how people are. And in one respect, I understand that, because we have to be long-suffering with people, right? The Bible even tells us that God looks down and doesn't want the world to end because there's somebody that might want to be saved, right? 2 Peter chapter 3, God is long-suffering or patient toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. So I think there's that attitude. But I think we also have to have the attitude of being appalled by sin that Ezra and Nehemiah did. You remember Ezra's reaction when he saw the sin going on? Remember what he did? He tore his clothes. And then you remember what else he did? Pulled his beard and pulled his hair out, right? And so I don't know that we are really bothered and appalled by sin in the way that we should be. And so certainly when we see sin, it shouldn't be judgment. I think that's where we mess up, right? That, we see these situations and we immediately pass judgment. One of the things that really bothered me in previous generations was somebody would be caught in some sin or some action. And, people from the church would write them letters or, and kind of scold them from afar. And I don't know when we got in the letter writing business. I'm glad that's something that doesn't happen today. Now we just scold them over text message, right? But that's certainly not what we should do, right? We need to lovingly approach people and put our arms around them and help them and guide them back to the right way. But even though we don't pass judgment, and even though we love and we are compassionate, the Bible is very clear about how God feels about sin. And I think we have to have that same attitude, and we can't just sort of shrug sin off. Nehemiah could have just said, those people, it's always going to be rich and poor, right? There's always going to be the haves and the have-nots, so we'll just kind of let it go. And Nehemiah could have said, hey, I left a cushy position, right? I was, one of the top people in Persia, and I was the cupbearer to the king. And hey, if, he wants to make me governor and I'm going to get all this food and drink, I can sit back. I can, take some time off and enjoy the sheep. I've never known what it was like to have the 10 finest sheep in the nation brought to me every, couple of weeks. But, he could have sat there and eaten and enjoyed. But instead, he fed 150 people at his table and sacrificed and made sure that the needs of the people were met. And so I think that's important. But I also think verse 19 is important. And I want you to kind of keep a note here, because we're going to see this phrase a couple of more times as we go through and finish the book of Nehemiah. Somebody read verse 19 for us. This is chapter 5, verse 19. Yeah. Remember me with favor for all I've done for these people. Say that one more time. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Doesn't that apply in the case of Sodom and says we are supposed?
Well, so that's a great question. Turn over to Galatians chapter 1. This is the passage that always comes to mind. Somebody, when you get there, read Galatians chapter 1, verse 10.
Or am I now seeking the favor of people or of God? Or am I striving to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a bondservant of Christ.
Yeah. So I think what Nehemiah is getting at here is, God, please remember me for what I'm doing. Because the Old Testament always has an air and an understanding of inevitability. Because by the time we get to the end of Nehemiah, by the time we get to the end of every one of these books, the people are going to stray away. And I think Nehemiah here is saying, Lord, remember, if these people are unfaithful, remember that I tried. Remember that I was trying to stand up for you. Remember what I was doing. I don't think this was a boast before the people. I think this was him talking to God, saying, God, please remember me. I think about the thief on the cross. You remember what the thief on the cross asked Jesus? Remember me when you come into your kingdom. I think it's that same thing. Lord, remember me. Have mercy on me because of the things that I've tried to do. And it's a message that's going to be repeated. All right, let's go really quickly to chapter 6. Chapter 6, there's going to be, in the first 14 verses, assassination attempts by our good old friends, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arab, right? The rest of our enemies that had rebuilt the wall, not a gap was left in it. So the wall is rebuilt. When last we came together, the wall was halfway built. Now the wall is all the way built. He said there's not a gap left in it, though at that time I had not set the doors in the gate. So everything is there except for the doors. So they couldn't kill him with brute force. So now they put together a scheme. It says they sent a message, let us meet together in one of the villages. And it says there they were scheming to harm me. So Nehemiah said, listen, basically, I'm busy. I can't come down there. I can't stop this work to go and meet with you. It says 4 times they sent the same message and it gave the same answer. Then a 5th time, Sanballat sent his aide to me with the same message, and in his hand was an unsealed letter in which what is written. Now they're going to accuse him of something. It's reported among the nations, and Geshem says it is true, that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you're building the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you are about to become their king, and have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. Now this report will get back to the king, so come and let us meet together. So I think there's a couple of interesting things going on here. Number one, are y'all familiar with the phrase grasping at straws? Right, that's what they're doing. They couldn't get the physical intimidation to work, so now they're politically scheming, and they try to meet him to have him killed. And now it says, hey, people are talking, right? They're saying that you're going to proclaim yourself a king. I think this is so interesting. Do you remember what was written above Jesus' head on the cross? King of the Jews. And I've always thought that was interesting. You know, certainly there's some foreshadowing there, because this was going to be something that would have gotten Nehemiah killed as well if he'd have proclaimed himself king. And so there's the accusation thrown at Nehemiah. Nehemiah's answer in chapter 6 and verse 8, I love it. I don't know what it says in your versions. The NIV says, I sent him this reply. Nothing like what you were saying is happening. You are just making it up out of your head. I've said that to a lot of people a lot of times. That is all in your head, right? What do some of the other versions say there? I'm curious. You're making things up in your heart. Interesting. You're inventing them in your own mind. Interesting. Anybody say anything else? I played a game with my kids today in class that I threatened to play with you guys yesterday, and was identify the Taylor Swift lyric, or if it's from the Book of Lamentations. And we took the Message translation, which is kind of a paraphrase translation of the Book of Lamentations, and compared it to Taylor Swift lyrics. It was pretty funny. They could not figure it out, but we spent time doing that. And some of these translations give us things that are a little wild, but some of them give us interesting things as well. That verse in the Message, let's see here, Nehemiah chapter 6. I have in my office a side by side of the Message and the New King James. The Message just says, "There's nothing to what you're saying. You've made it all up." So pretty simple.
Jeremy,
Yes.
why would translations be different from mind and heart when your heart is really a charge of all?
Yeah. So yeah.
Your heart should be not mind.
Yeah, the Hebrew word would encompass both. And heart is the word. I think we had the same issue come up last week. That the people had a mind to work, or the people worked with all their heart. That those would have been interchangeable, mind and heart. Although I think in our understanding of it, right, the heart is the emotional center and the mind is the intellectual center. I think that they would have been an all-encompassing.